I'm thrilled to welcome you to our data use class. So this privacy law class is about how to use or how corporations can use personal information. I'm Lisa Thomas, an adjunct professor here at Northwestern, and a partner and the lead of the privacy and cyber security team at Shepherd Mullen in Chicago, and I also spend time in our London office. So I'm thrilled to have you join this class, and I think we're going to have a great time over the coming term looking at laws that apply to when companies use personal information. So this brief video is to give you an overview of the different laws that we're going to be looking at, and also a little bit of a preview for a separate class that I teach that has to do with data security and data breach, something we're not covering in this class, but I think is useful to be thinking about as you're covering and as you're thinking about the laws that we're going to be looking at. So first caveat or first warning is that this class is going to be very focused on us as a team being outside counsel for corporations that are using personal information. And another caveat and thing to know is that the laws that we're looking at are going to change all the time. So this recording gives you an overview of what the laws look like. And the assignments, the written assignments, give you an overview of what those laws look like, but my job will not be done well if I haven't given you the tools to read and understand actual laws. I would never ask you to read all of the different laws that we're going to be talking about in class, but I will be having you look at some of the more popular and problematic laws that we're going to be looking at. And you will hopefully, by the end of this term, get the skills that you need to be able to read those laws, knowing that by the time you're actually dealing with them in the working world, as much as I hate to say it, they probably will have changed and will not be the same as they are today as we are looking at them in this class. So broadly speaking, the laws divide up into two types or two categories. In the US, we have laws that are mostly industry and activity specific, although we're starting to get more generally applicable laws. And we're going to look at what that means and what kinds of laws those are during our time together. So for the rest of the world, the approach is more focused on comprehensive privacy laws. So we have comprehensive laws around the globe, and they're all fairly similar because they're all based off of a set of principles that were developed at an international level and have been adopted into various countries' laws. We also see that actually in the US from the Federal Trade Commission, which is the FTC's Fair Information Practice Principles, one of the readings that you have. And that's a sort of general approach that's a principle-based approach, but that's not the long-standing approach that we see with privacy compliance, so data use regulation in the US. And instead, what we see in the US are laws that are based on either what activity you engage in, I'll look at that in a second, or what industry you're in. So for industries, the ones that most people are familiar with are healthcare services, so HIPAA. So that is the law that applies to entities that provide healthcare services, not if they have health information, but instead if they're a provider of healthcare services, or companies or entities that provide financial services, or which is Gramm-Leach-Bliley, or companies that are in the telecom industry. So again, this is in your reading, but just to help orient you, think about these laws divided between industry specific, and then we also have activity specific. So we'll spend a lot of our sessions looking at those activity specific laws because that historically has been where much of the privacy regulation has been in the US. So we'll look at email, regulations. I know it's frightening to think, but there are still fax regulations. And not only are there still fax regulations, but companies still send faxes. Often they don't realize they do until they get sued for having sent a fax without getting appropriate consents or without providing opt-out. Again, something we're going to look at during our time together. Ones that are a little bit meatier and trickier and we'll spend more time on are laws around sending text messages and making calls, and those are laws that get changed fairly frequently. I'm sure for many of you 2013 seems like it was a million years ago, but in the grand scheme of privacy law it was a blink of an eye, and that was the last time that text messaging law was updated. There's also state laws that apply to making calls and sending text messages. We'll also look at one that I think is of a lot of interest for a lot of people, our behavioral advertising or online tracking and targeting. So we're going to look at those laws. Another thing that we're going to we'll keep in the back of our heads is that there are laws that have to do with protecting information, and there's laws that you will see a lot that have to do with if there is a data breach. Again, that's a separate class, which I would love for you to take, but important to keep in mind that I divide the world up into these laws that apply to how we use information and then laws that apply to protecting information or if you fail to protect information. This is a map that shows you where there are data breach laws. There are data breach laws all over the place. So finally, two skills that I hope you walk away from this class with. One is, as I mentioned, knowing how to read these laws and understand the laws. But the second is recognizing that in order to properly advise your client on compliance with the laws, you really have to understand the facts that are specific to your client. And how you go about gathering those facts is not easy. Because remember, we are outside counsel and our client is inside counsel. So in-house counsel themselves have to gather information from a variety of constituents within the organization. They need to understand how to use information. They need to understand, they need to understand what information is collected, how it's collected, where it's stored, how it's used. There's a lot of different people within the organization that are going to provide them with that information. So it's important that you think about this, and we will spend some time in this class looking at how we can best get that information, because that's really what's going to make the difference when you're out in the working world between advice that is okay and advice that is really truly helpful for your client. So we'll spend some time doing exercises and spending time in our group time together, figuring out how we can get the information that we need in order to give good advice. I look forward to seeing everybody in class. I hope that this brief video giving you an introduction to the class was useful, and I will see you next time.